I walked into the study looking for Dad's reading glasses and froze halfway through the doorway. Trent stood with his back to me, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and calculated. She's still grieving. Emotional. We'll tell the board she's not mentally fit to manage the estate. They won't question it if we present a united front. My father had been dead exactly 3 weeks. The funeral flowers were still wilting in vases throughout the house. And my brother-in-law was already plotting to steal everything Dad had built over 40 years. I stepped backward carefully, my hand finding the doorframe to steady myself. The old floor didn't creak. Trent kept talking, oblivious to my presence just feet away. Once we establish incompetence, the transfer should be straightforward. The house alone is worth $2.3 million. We can liquidate within 6 months. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought he'd hear it. I backed into the hallway, pressed myself against the wall, and focused on breathing silently. He didn't know I'd heard him. That was the only advantage I had right now. I needed to keep it that way. My name is Verity Morgan, and I need you to understand something important right from the start. I'm not crazy. I'm not paranoid. I'm not the unstable, grief-stricken daughter they're going to try to paint me as. 2 weeks before I overheard that phone call, I'd flown home from Chicago for the reading of Dad's will. I'd stayed behind after the funeral to handle his business affairs, close his office, notify his clients. The practical things that nobody else wanted to deal with. My sister Kara and her husband Trent had rushed back to the family estate immediately, saying they needed to start making decisions about the property. I didn't think much of it at the time. Kara had always been close to Dad. She'd visited him every Sunday for dinner. She'd helped him maintain the gardens Mom had planted before she died. It made sense she'd want to be there, surrounded by memories, processing grief in her own way. I should have known better. I should have remembered that Kara had always been the one who calculated her moves carefully, who positioned herself exactly where she needed to be to get what she wanted. But I was drowning in my own grief, exhausted from making arrangements and fielding calls from Dad's colleagues. I wasn't thinking strategically. That was my first mistake. The will reading happened in the estate's formal dining room, the lawyer sitting at the head of the long mahogany table where we'd shared countless family meals. Kara sat to his right, Trent beside her with his hand possessively on her knee. I sat across from them, alone. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. Most of it was standard legal language that washed over me like white noise. Then he got to the asset distribution. To my daughter Verity Morgan, I leave the family estate in its entirety, including the main house, guest cottage, all furnishings and personal effects, and the property grounds spanning 12 acres. The room went silent. I looked up from my hands to find Kara staring at me, her smile tight and frozen. Trent's expression was harder to read, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the lawyer like he was waiting for a correction that never came. The estate is not to be divided or sold without Verity's express written consent, the lawyer continued. She is granted sole decision-making authority regarding all property matters. Not jointly. Not split between sisters. Not shared. Just me. Dad trusted me with this, I said quietly, more to myself than to them. Trent nodded too quickly, the movement jerky and insincere. Kara finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Of course. We'll talk about all this later. When you're ready. The gaslighting started so subtly I almost didn't recognize it was happening. 3 days after the will reading, Kara found me in the kitchen making coffee. Did you remember to call the insurance company? She asked, her tone light but pointed. What insurance company? I turned to face her, confused. For the house. The policy needs updating now that ownership has transferred. I mentioned it yesterday at breakfast. She sighed, a patient sound that made my skin prickle. You really don't remember? I didn't remember because the conversation had never happened. But the way she looked at me, concerned and slightly pitying, made me doubt my own certainty. I must have been distracted, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. It's understandable, Kara said, squeezing my shoulder. You're under so much stress. Are you sure you're okay to be here? Maybe you should go back to Chicago, take some time to process everything. Trent and I can handle the house for a while. It was the first direct suggestion that I leave. That I step away from the estate and let them manage things. I told her I was fine. That I wanted to stay. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she nodded and left the room. That evening, Trent cornered me in the hallway. "Kara's worried about you," he said, blocking my path to the stairs. "We both are. Have you thought about talking to someone? A therapist, maybe? Grief can do strange things to a person's judgment." I started finding things out of place. Small things at first. Dad's reading glasses moved from his study desk to the living room mantel. Files reorganized in his cabinet. Books shelved in different orders. When I mentioned it to Kara, she looked genuinely confused. "I haven't touched anything in the study. Are you sure you didn't move them yourself and forget?" But I knew I hadn't. I'd been careful not to disturb Dad's things, treating his study like a sacred space I was still working up the courage to sort through properly. One night, unable to sleep, I went downstairs for water and saw light under the study door. I pushed it open quietly to find Kara standing at Dad's desk, a drawer open in front of her. She jumped when she saw me, slamming the drawer shut quickly. "You scared me," she said, laughing nervously. "Just looking for some old photos. For the memorial board." "At 2 in the morning?" She bristled at my tone. "I couldn't sleep. When did you become so suspicious?" She pushed past me and went upstairs, leaving me standing in the study wondering if I was losing my mind. The next day, I returned to that drawer. It was locked. It had never been locked before. I searched Dad's key ring but couldn't find the right key. Several documents that should have been in his main filing cabinet were missing entirely, including the original copy of his will. I made a call I should have made weeks earlier. To my college roommate, now a successful estate attorney in Boston. We'd kept in touch over the years, close enough that I trusted her completely. "Something's wrong," I told her, keeping my voice low even though I was alone in my car in the grocery store parking lot. "My sister and her husband are acting strange, and I think they're trying to manipulate me into giving up control of the estate." She listened while I explained everything. The missing documents, the gaslighting, the constant suggestions that I wasn't mentally fit to handle things. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Verity, listen carefully. You need to play along. Pretend you don't know what they're doing. Don't confront them, don't argue, don't give them any reason to think you're onto them." "Why?" "Because right now, they think they're being clever. They think you're vulnerable and confused. Let them keep thinking that. Let them build their case against themselves while you build your actual case. Document everything. Save every text, every email, every conversation you can record legally. Can you do that?" I thought about Trent's voice on that phone call. "She's not mentally fit to manage the estate." "Yes," I said. "I can do that." The next incident came at dinner 3 nights later. We sat at the dining room table, the three of us maintaining the pretense of family unity. Trent cut into his steak with precise movements, his knife scraping against the plate. "I have a meeting with the estate advisory board next Thursday," he said casually, not looking up. "The what?" I set down my fork. "The advisory board. They oversee large estate transfers, make sure everything's handled properly. Standard procedure." He said it like I should have known. Like this was common knowledge everyone except me possessed. "I wasn't aware of any meeting," I said carefully. Kara jumped in, her voice soothing. "We figured you'd want space from all the administrative details. You're still processing so much. We thought we'd handle the boring paperwork side of things." "I'm the estate owner. Shouldn't I be at this meeting?" Trent finally looked at me, his expression patient in a way that made my teeth clench. "Of course, if you feel up to it. We just didn't want to overwhelm you." My phone was in my lap, recording app running. I'd started recording every interaction after my lawyer friend's advice. "What time is the meeting?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. 2 p.m. Thursday. At the First National Bank downtown. Trent smiled. "We'll go together if you'd like." "That would be perfect," I said, returning his smile. Under the table, I made note of the date and time. I'd be making some calls before Thursday. Dad's safe was behind a painting in his study, a landscape Mom had painted during one of their vacations to Vermont. I'd watched him open it countless times over the years, knew the combination by heart. 6 digits, Mom's birthday. Inside, I found what I was looking for and what I wasn't expecting. The real will was there, exactly as it had been read to us. Dad's signature clear and unmistakable at the bottom, witnessed and notarized properly. But there was another document underneath it. Another will. This one looked almost identical, same format, same legal language. But the key section had been changed. Instead of leaving everything to me, it left the estate jointly to both me and Kara, with Trent listed as executor. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be Dad's. But I'd seen Dad's signature thousands of times. On birthday cards, permission slips, the backs of checks. This wasn't his handwriting. It was close. Skilled enough that someone glancing quickly might not notice. But the way the tail on the G in Morgan curved was wrong. The slant of the letters was too steep. Someone had forged my father's signature on a fake will. And they'd done it sloppily, with the kind of arrogance that comes from not expecting to get caught. I took photos of both documents with my phone, my hands shaking. Then I called my lawyer. Thursday arrived with clear skies and my nerves stretched thin. I dressed professionally, business casual, trying to project competence and stability. Everything they were claiming I lacked. Trent and Kara were already in the car when I came downstairs, Trent behind the wheel. The drive to the bank took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Nobody spoke. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. We parked and walked into First National, Trent leading the way with the confident stride of someone who belonged here. He approached the reception desk. "We have a 2 o'clock appointment with the Estate Advisory Board." The receptionist checked her computer, her brow furrowing slightly. "I don't see any appointments scheduled for today." Trent's confidence faltered for just a second. "Check under Harrington or Morgan Estate." She clicked through several screens, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no advisory board meeting scheduled. We don't actually have an estate advisory board at this location." The silence that followed was deafening. Kara looked at Trent with confusion written across her face. "You said, there must be some mistake," Trent interrupted, his voice tight. "I spoke with someone last week who confirmed." "Perhaps you have the wrong bank," the receptionist suggested politely. I watched Trent's jaw clench, watched him realize his lie was unraveling in real time. Then I pulled the envelope from my purse. The one my lawyer had prepared. "Actually," I said calmly, "I need to file these documents with probate court. Could you direct me to the right office?" The probate court office was 3 blocks away. I walked there alone while Kara and Trent had what looked like an intense conversation in the parking lot. I could see them through the bank's glass doors, Trent's hands gesturing sharply while Kara stood with her arms crossed. Inside the probate office, I filed copies of both wills with the clerk. The real one and the forgery. "I'm reporting suspected fraud," I told her, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Someone has created a false will in an attempt to fraudulently claim inheritance." The clerk looked at both documents carefully, making notes. "You'll need to file a formal complaint. I can give you the forms." I filled out everything right there, documented timeline of events, the missing documents, the mysterious advisory board meeting that didn't exist. By the time I finished, an hour had passed. When I stepped back outside, Kara was waiting on the courthouse steps. Alone. Her face was red, eyes puffy from crying. "How could you?" she said, her voice breaking. "How could you accuse us of fraud? We're family." "Where's the fake will from, Kara?" I asked directly. She flinched. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The one in Dad's safe. The one that gives you half the estate and makes Trent executor. Where did it come from?" Her mouth opened and closed. No words came out. "That's what I thought," I said, walking past her toward my own car. The guilt trip escalated over the next few days. Kara cornered me in the hallway outside my bedroom, tears streaming down her face in a performance that would have won awards if I hadn't known better. "You're tearing this family apart," she said, her voice raw. "Over money. Over property. Dad would be devastated if he knew what you were doing." "Dad is the one who made the decision," I said quietly. "He chose to leave the estate to me. I'm just honoring his wishes." "He would have wanted us to share," Kara insisted. "He loved both of us equally. This will, it's not fair. It's not what he would have really wanted if he'd thought about it more." I looked at her carefully, searching for the sister I'd grown up with. The one who'd braided my hair before school. Who'd taught me to ride a bike. Who'd held me when Mom died. That person felt like a stranger now. "Dad had years to think about it," I said. "He revised his will 6 months before he passed. He was sharp, clear-minded, completely competent. He knew exactly what he was doing." "You've changed," Kara said, her tears drying up with startling speed. "You've become cold. Heartless." "No," I corrected. "I've just stopped letting you manipulate me." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. I went into my room and added another entry to the timeline I was building. Every conversation documented. Every attempt at manipulation recorded. My lawyer's investigator worked fast. Within a week, she'd uncovered financial records that painted a devastating picture. Trent's business was drowning in debt. His construction company had overextended on 3 major projects that went bust when the pandemic hit. Their personal home was mortgaged to the limit, payments 3 months behind. Credit cards maxed out. Lines of credit exhausted. They were staring at bankruptcy. And the only thing that could save them was liquidating an asset worth $2.3 million. My family's estate. Kara might not have known the full extent of their financial situation, my lawyer said during our phone call. Based on what we're seeing, Trent's been hiding a lot from her. The debt is mostly in his name, tied to his business accounts. I thought about my sister. How she'd always deferred to her husband on financial matters. How Trent handled all their banking, their investments, their major purchases. "So she might have been manipulated too," I said slowly. "It's possible. That doesn't excuse her participation in fraud, but it provides context. Trent needed this estate sale to survive. He probably convinced Kara it was the right thing to do, that you weren't capable of managing the property, that they were helping you by taking control." Everything clicked into place. This wasn't about sibling rivalry or jealousy. It was about desperation. And desperate people did dangerous things. The confrontation I didn't expect came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in Dad's study finally sorting through his files when Trent appeared in the doorway. No knock. No warning. Just suddenly there, filling the space with tension. "You need to stop this," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Stop what?" I didn't look up from the papers in my hand. "This witch hunt. These accusations. You're making everyone look bad over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Now I did look at him. "You forged my father's signature on a false will. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a felony." His face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what kind of pressure you're under when you're trying to keep a business alive. When everything you've built is collapsing around you. So you thought you'd steal my inheritance to save yourself?" His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "It's not stealing. Kara deserved half. Your father was just too stubborn to admit it. We were correcting an injustice. By committing fraud. By taking care of family." Trent stepped into the room, and for the first time, I felt genuinely afraid. "You need to let this go, Verity. You need to accept a compromise. We'll split the estate sale proceeds. Everyone walks away whole. Nobody gets hurt." The threat in his voice was clear. "Get out of this room," I said steadily. "Stay out. You'll regret this," he said, turning to leave. I called after him, "Only if you make me." I stopped arguing after that. Stopped defending myself. Stopped engaging with their accusations and manipulations entirely. When Kara texted asking to talk, I responded with brief, neutral replies. When Trent tried to discuss compromise solutions, I told him to direct all communication through my lawyer. The silence on my end drove them crazy. I could see it in the way Kara paced the hallways, in how Trent's jaw was constantly clenched, in the increasingly desperate messages they sent asking why I was being so unreasonable. But every text they sent, every email they wrote, every voicemail they left was documentation. Evidence of their increasing panic. Evidence of contradictions in their story. My lawyer collected everything, organized it chronologically, built a timeline that showed exactly how their narrative kept shifting. "They're making mistakes," she told me during one of our evening calls. "When people panic, they get sloppy. Just keep letting them talk. Keep letting them dig their own hole deeper." So that's what I did. I became silent, patient, watchful. While they spiraled, I built my case brick by brick. Every piece of evidence carefully catalogued. Every inconsistency documented. Every lie preserved for the record. Silence, I was learning, was its own kind of power. I needed one more piece of evidence. Something concrete that would prove intent to defraud. So I created an opportunity for them to incriminate themselves. I drafted a document on official-looking letterhead. Transfer of property rights across the top. Below it, carefully worded language about me voluntarily relinquishing my ownership stake in the estate to my sister. I left it on Dad's desk in the study, partially visible under some other papers. Made it look accidental, like I'd been reviewing it and walked away. Then I installed a small camera on the bookshelf, angled toward the desk. And I waited. 2 days later, I checked the camera footage. Trent had entered the study at 11 p.m. Looked around to make sure he was alone. Then picked up my fake transfer document and photographed it with his phone. He'd taken the bait. 3 days after that, my lawyer called. "You're not going to believe this. A transfer of property deed was just filed at the county clerk's office. Signed by you, transferring the estate to your sister." "But I never signed anything," I said, though I'd been expecting exactly this. "I know. The signature doesn't match yours. Whoever forged it did a worse job than they did on the will. And the document they filed? It's word for word identical to that fake transfer you created. They literally forged your signature on a trap you set for them." Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I served them papers at breakfast. Walked into the dining room where they sat eating eggs and toast, pretending everything was normal. Set 2 envelopes down on the table, one in front of Kara, one in front of Trent. "You've been served," I said simply. Kara's spoon clattered against her bowl, splattering milk. Trent stared at the envelope like it might explode. "What is this?" he asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "A lawsuit. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft. Also a criminal complaint filed with the district attorney's office. You forged legal documents, Trent. Multiple documents. You filed a fraudulent property transfer with a county clerk. Those are serious crimes." Kara opened her envelope with shaking hands, scanning the first page. Her face went from pale to gray. "Verity, please. We can talk about this. We're past talking. You had opportunities to stop. To come clean. To admit what you were doing. You chose to keep lying instead." I looked at Trent directly. "You forged my signature on a property transfer using a document you stole from this house. Every step of that process was caught on camera and documented by my legal team. Good luck explaining that to a judge." Trent's hands were flat on the table, his knuckles white. For a moment, I thought he might flip the table entirely. But he just sat there, trapped, realizing the walls were closing in. I walked out of that dining room with my spine straight and my conscience clear. Word spread faster than I expected. Small-town networks being what they are, everyone knew about the lawsuit within days. Kara's friends stopped calling. Stopped inviting her to book club and yoga classes. The sympathetic casseroles that had appeared after Dad's death vanished entirely. Trent's business partners began quietly distancing themselves. One by one, they withdrew from projects, citing ethical concerns and reputational risk. His company, already drowning, started sinking faster. I found a notebook in their room while packing up their belongings at my lawyer's instruction. A legal pad with Trent's handwriting covering multiple pages. At the top, assets to liquidate. Below it, a list. The estate house. The guest cottage. The property grounds. Dad's car collection. Mom's jewelry. My name was at the very top, circled 3 times, with a note beside it, establish incompetence first. Then conservatorship. Then liquidation. They'd had a whole plan. Steps outlined. Timeline projected. They'd been working toward this since before Dad even died, I realized with growing horror. The dates on some of these notes went back months. Trent had been planning to steal my inheritance while my father was still alive. I took photos of every page and sent them to my lawyer. Then I locked that notebook in my safe. Evidence. Always evidence. Court day arrived cold and gray, winter pressing down on the city. I wore a navy suit, professional and composed. Kara and Trent sat across the courtroom with their lawyer, a young guy who looked overwhelmed by the evidence stacked against his clients. The judge was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and zero patience for nonsense. She'd reviewed all the preliminary filings before the hearing. When Trent's lawyer stood to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, a family dispute blown out of proportion, she cut him off. "Counselor, your client filed a forged property transfer with the county clerk. He created a falsified will. Multiple handwriting experts have confirmed the signatures don't match. Where exactly is the misunderstanding?" Trent tried to speak, his voice carrying that smooth charm he'd always used to talk his way out of problems. "Your Honor, if I could just explain the context." "The context," she interrupted icily, "is that you knowingly filed falsified legal documents. That's fraud. That's forgery. Those are crimes, Mr. Harrington, not misunderstandings." Kara looked at me across the courtroom, her eyes pleading. Finally afraid. Finally understanding that this wasn't going away. That she couldn't cry or manipulate or guilt her way out of what they'd done. I held her gaze but didn't blink. Didn't soften. This was the consequence of choosing theft over honesty. Of choosing her husband over her sister. Of choosing greed over family. The court-ordered search of their home revealed something I didn't expect. Among Trent's business files and financial records, investigators found Kara's personal journal. A leather-bound book she'd kept for years, entries dating back to when she first met Trent. My lawyer called me to her office to review key passages before they became official evidence. "You need to see this," she said, sliding the photocopies across her desk. I read Kara's handwriting, the familiar loops and curves from birthday cards and shopping lists. But the words were different. March 15th, Trent says Verity won't be able to handle the estate. That she's too emotional, too scattered. He says we'd be helping her by taking control. But something feels wrong about this. Dad chose Verity for a reason. April 3rd, I found the fake will Trent made. Confronted him. He cried. Said we'd lose everything if we don't do this. Said he'd end up in prison for the business debts. I don't know what to do. I love him, but this is wrong. April 20th, I feel sick every time I look at Verity. She doesn't know what we're planning. What Trent's planning. I should tell her. I should stop this. But if I do, Trent says we lose everything. She'd known. Known it was wrong. Known I'd be hurt. And she'd done it anyway. Not because she wanted to. But because she'd been manipulated by someone she loved. It didn't excuse what she'd done. But it explained it. And it changed how I felt about her, just slightly. From betrayed to something more complicated. Something that felt like pity mixed with anger mixed with the ghost of old love. The investigator found more. A bank transfer from 6 months ago, buried in Trent's business accounts. $5,000 paid to a mobile notary service. But not a legitimate one. This was a guy who'd been convicted of notary fraud twice before, still operating under a different LLC name. My lawyer tracked him down through his business license. Offered him immunity in exchange for testimony. He came forward willingly, eager to avoid another conviction. Trent Harrington paid me to notarize a will, he told the prosecutor in a recorded statement. He said it was a family matter, that the signatures were already done but they needed it officially witnessed. I knew something was off, but the money was good. Did he say anything about the legitimacy of the document? He said the sister wouldn't fight it. That she was too messed up from grief to notice anything wrong. That she'd probably just accept whatever they told her. The sister. That's how Trent had referred to me. Not by name. Just as an obstacle. A problem to be managed. A mark too emotional to think clearly. Hearing those words played back in the prosecutor's office made my hands shake with rage. But I kept my voice steady when I spoke. That's him admitting premeditation. Admitting he knew it was fraud. Yes, the prosecutor agreed. That's exactly what it is. Faced with that testimony, with the documented evidence, with the prosecutor preparing criminal charges, Kara made a choice. She fired her lawyer and hired a criminal defense attorney. Then she asked for a meeting with the prosecutor without Trent present. When my lawyer told me, I felt something twist in my chest. She's flipping on him, I said. Looks that way. The meeting happened in a conference room at the courthouse. Kara sat across from the prosecutor, her new lawyer beside her, and told everything. How Trent had hidden the business debts from her. How he'd convinced her that taking the estate was the only way to save their family from financial ruin. How he'd forged the will before even telling her his plan, presenting it as a done deal she just needed to go along with. He said Verity was weak, Kara testified, her voice breaking. That she was always too sensitive, too emotional. That she wouldn't know what hit her until it was over. That we'd tell everyone she'd agreed to split the estate, and by the time she realized what happened, it would be too late to fight. She looked at me through the glass partition. We were in the observation room, watching via video feed. I knew it was wrong, she said, tears streaming. I knew from the beginning. But I was so afraid of losing everything. Of losing him. I made the worst choice of my life. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. Sad. Like I was watching the collapse of something that could never be rebuilt. My lawyer squeezed my shoulder. Are you okay? No, I said honestly. But I will be. The verdict came down on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Fraud. Forgery. Attempted theft through deception. The judge's voice was steady as she read out the penalties. Trent lost his business license permanently. His company was dissolved, assets liquidated to pay creditors. Their house went into foreclosure. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 18 months. Kara received probation and community service in exchange for her testimony. She'd cooperate fully with returning all documents, providing access to accounts, ensuring nothing else was hidden. My ownership of the estate was reaffirmed in official court documents. Sealed. Protected. Permanent. No one could challenge it again. I sat in that courtroom listening to the judge speak, and I didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. Didn't feel victorious. I just felt the weight of 2 years lift slightly. The constant vigilance, the fear that they might succeed, the exhaustion of fighting people who should have been family. It was over. I stood tall, gathered my things, and walked out of that courthouse knowing I'd protected what Dad had entrusted to me. Not through luck or pity, but through preparation, documentation, and refusing to be the weak, emotional victim they'd expected me to be. Kara moved out of the estate on a Saturday morning. I watched from the study window as she loaded boxes into a rental truck. No furniture, she'd lost that in the foreclosure. Just personal belongings. Clothes and books and the fragments of a life that had imploded. She knocked on the study door before leaving. I opened it but didn't invite her in. We stood there looking at each other across the threshold, a distance that felt wider than the physical space between us. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For all of it. For choosing him over you. For letting him convince me to do something I knew was wrong. I nodded. I know you are. Can you ever forgive me? I thought about that question. About forgiveness and what it meant. About whether reconciliation was possible or even desirable after this kind of betrayal. Maybe someday, I said honestly. But not today. And not soon. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I deserve that. She left an envelope on the hallway table. Inside, a single note in her handwriting. I chose the wrong person. I'm sorry I didn't choose my sister. I didn't respond. Didn't reach out. Didn't offer comfort or connection. Some wounds don't need closure. They just need distance. Time. The space to scar over properly. I watched her drive away, then locked the front gate behind her. The estate was mine. Fully. Finally. And I could begin the work of making it a home again. I spent the next 6 months restoring the estate room by room. Not to erase the past or pretend the betrayal hadn't happened, but to reclaim the space as mine. I hung photos of Dad throughout the house. Him with Mom in the garden, both of them laughing. Him at his desk working on Sunday mornings. Him teaching me to fish at the lake behind the property. I polished the floors he'd walked on. Repaired the fence he'd built. Restored Mom's garden that had gone wild during the legal battles. Planted new flowers between the old ones, growth and memory existing together. The guest cottage became my studio. I'd started painting again, something I'd abandoned years ago. The creative work felt like therapy, each brushstroke an act of reclaiming myself. Friends visited. Real friends who'd supported me through the lawsuit. Who'd never questioned my sanity or suggested I was being unreasonable. We had dinners on the patio where Dad used to grill. Watched sunsets from the porch where Mom used to read. The house stopped feeling haunted by betrayal and started feeling like home again. Not erasing what happened. Not pretending the last 2 years hadn't scarred me. But choosing to build something new on top of the foundation Dad had left me. The estate wasn't just property anymore. It was proof that I could protect what mattered. That I could stand up to manipulation and win. That I was stronger than anyone, including me, had realized. A letter arrived from the Estate Advisory Board. The real one this time, not Trent's fictional version. They were a regional organization that oversaw historic property preservation. We've been following your case, the letter read. Your defense of your family's legacy and your commitment to preserving the estate has been admirable. We'd like to offer you a seat on our advisory committee. Your experience and dedication would be valuable as we work to protect historic properties throughout the region. I read that letter 3 times, sitting at Dad's desk in the study where I'd overheard Trent's phone call 2 years ago. An invitation to help others protect their legacies. To use what I'd learned through pain and betrayal to support other families navigating complex estate issues. I framed that letter and hung it in the study. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that fighting for what's right, even when it costs you relationships, has value beyond just winning. That protecting your boundaries and refusing to be manipulated is worth the temporary loneliness it creates. That standing up for yourself teaches you exactly how strong you actually are. I accepted their invitation. Started attending monthly meetings. Began working with families facing similar manipulation and fraud attempts. Helped them document evidence, connect with lawyers, build the cases they needed to protect themselves. Every person I helped felt like honoring Dad. Like using the strength he'd given me for something bigger than just my own victory. The final discovery came on a winter evening almost 3 years after Dad's death. I was organizing the study one last time, preparing to donate some of his business books to the local library. Behind a row of legal texts on the bottom shelf, my hand touched something that wasn't a book. An envelope. Sealed. With my name written across the front in Dad's distinctive handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it carefully. Inside was a single key, old brass, the kind that opens antique locks. And a note on Dad's personal stationery. Verity, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've stayed. The key opens the desk drawer in the master bedroom, the one your mother used for her private journals. Inside, you'll find documents I've kept safe. Proof of property ownership going back 4 generations. My own will, signed and witnessed by 3 independent lawyers. Bank account information Kara doesn't know about, set aside specifically for estate maintenance. I'm leaving everything to you not because I love Kara less, but because I know you'll protect it. You were always the one who understood that family isn't just about blood. It's about trust, integrity, and showing up when things get hard. Kara has Trent, and he'll always be her priority. That's her choice. But you, my dear girl, you have the strength your mother had. The kind that doesn't break under pressure. For the one who never ran. Love, Dad. I sat on the floor of that study and wept. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing Dad had understood everything. Had known exactly what might happen. Had trusted me to handle it. The key opened the drawer just as he'd said. Inside were all the documents he'd mentioned, each one meticulously organized. Including a letter addressed to the probate court, written months before his death, explaining his decision to leave the estate solely to me. My daughter Verity has the integrity and strength to preserve our family's legacy. She will not be pressured into decisions that compromise the property's future. This is not a slight against my other daughter, but an acknowledgement of each person's character and capacity. That letter had been his insurance policy. His way of protecting me even after he was gone. I added it to my evidence files, though I'd never need it now. The legal battles were over. The estate was secure. But having his words, his faith in me documented so clearly, meant everything. That night, I stood on the back porch looking over the property. 12 acres of land my family had maintained for generations. The house where my grandparents had raised my father. Where my parents had raised me and Kara. Where memories layered on top of each other like paint on a canvas. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the manipulation, the courtroom battles. The way family could become strangers when money was involved. The way trust, once broken, left scars that never fully healed. But I also thought about what I'd learned. That knowing your worth means protecting it, even when protection looks like walking away from people you love. That documentation and preparation matter more than emotion when facing fraud. That silence can be more powerful than arguments. That chosen family, the people who show up consistently, matter as much as blood relatives. That you can honor someone's memory by defending what they built, even when defending it costs you relationships. I'd lost a sister, but I'd gained something more valuable. Self-respect. Boundaries that couldn't be crossed. The knowledge that I could stand up for myself when it mattered most. The estate stretched out before me in the moonlight, solid and permanent. Mine to protect, maintain, and eventually pass on to someone who would value it as much as I did. Someone who would understand that property isn't just about money. It's about legacy, history, and the trust that comes with preservation. I went inside and locked the door behind me. Safe in the house my father had trusted me with. Strong enough to protect it. Wise enough to know that some battles, no matter how painful, are worth fighting. Dad's note had ended with one line that I whispered to myself in the quiet study, for the one who never ran. I hadn't run. I'd stayed and fought and won. Not just the legal battle, but something more important. I'd won back myself. My voice. My power. My absolute refusal to let guilt silence me or manipulation control me. The estate was mine. The future was mine. And I'd built both on a foundation of truth, documentation, and the simple act of refusing to accept someone else's version of reality when I knew what was real. That was the final victory. Not the court ruling or the returned property, but the knowledge that I could trust myself. That I could stand alone if necessary. That I was strong enough to protect what mattered, even when protecting it meant losing people I'd once loved. I closed Dad's note carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I put it in the safe alongside all the other important documents. Evidence of everything I'd survived. Proof of everything I'd become. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight. A new day beginning. I turned off the study lights and headed upstairs to bed, knowing I'd sleep peacefully in a house that was finally completely, undeniably mine. They'd tried to steal my inheritance. But I'd had the law on my side, the truth in my corner, and something they'd never understood, the absolute certainty that I deserved to keep what my father had entrusted to me. And that certainty, that refusal to accept their narrative or bend to their manipulation, had made all the difference. The estate stood solid in the darkness. Protected. Preserved. Home.